European Union has been very active in pushing sustainability with the ERP directive. So for most power supplies, there are now strict regulations about minimum efficiencies, that they have to prove that they can have a certain survivability rate for a certain lifetime. You have to register your product and you have to print out.
So what are the import duties or the customs considerations that procurement managers should know when sourcing power electronics?
Power electronics, depending on what it's being used for, how they are classified as integrated part of another machine. This is a story by itself. It's normally in the chapter 85 of the customs book or HS code level. Start with 85. In Europe, it tends to be 2.7%, 3 point something percent, not so high. If it's part of a medical equipment, it can be even zero. If it's part of IT equipment, it can be zero. Lighting, similar. But there are now duties being imposed, especially by the US.
From China?
Against China,
yeah.
So that's why we see some of the Chinese manufacturers now very busy setting up shops in Mexico. To move the manufacturing. So now they move the parts from China to Mexico and assemble them there and then get in there. Mm-hmm. But honestly speaking, from the quality and from the manufacturing management process, I think a shift even makes it more risky.
Really?
Yeah, because you cannot shift everybody and you have to have new people in the new side, and that haven't had the learning curve that you had in China before.
What is it about Mexico? I was under the understanding that Vietnam and other places in Asia were kind of taking over the role of
Vietnam is taking a big role, especially in the IT industries. And they're doing a reasonable job, but they are not sufficiently numbered medium to high skilled level in Vietnam yet. So that they are being contributed from Taiwan, from Korea. That's why they had to joke. The People's Republic of Vietnam is also the People's Republic of Samsung, because Samsung is producing a lot in Vietnam now. Yeah, and some people say Samsung has somewhere of 25% of GDP of Vietnam. It's crazy.
Wow,
it's crazy. It's not just cell phones, also other industries. But
yeah. Okay, so in these days when sustainability is so important, and the rise of electronic vehicles and things like this, are there any power electronics that are sustainable that you've seen on the market or reduce the consumption?
Well, the European Union has been very active in pushing sustainability with the ERP directive. So for most power supplies, there are now strict regulations about minimum efficiencies, and in lighting especially also that they have to prove that they can have a certain survivability rate for a certain lifetime, which is now part of European law since March last year. So the European Union is pushing this much more than from the North American side. And you need to provide, as an importer, as the one who brings the product into the European market, you have to register your product on the European market website, and you have to print out an energy label. It's mandatory for lots of classes of products. And there are strict regulations, and now the energy label has a QR code, so that the people in the shop, in the retail shop, can go onto the product, scan the code, link to the European database, and there is a standardized data sheet behind it. And then there are other companies that can actually monitor whether you adhere to these standards. So the requirements have gone up substantially to meet these sustainable requirements, which I think is a good thing, because it actually helps to deliver better products into the market. But on the other side, it also limits competition, because the overhead to fulfill all these requirements is quite a challenge for smaller companies.
So does this mean that it costs more to play in this industry? Because now you need to budget for the sustainable power supplies.
It costs a little more, but it's a lot more pain.
Oh,
So it's because a lot of people don't have the skill to continuously meet the requirements, update those reports, do those things. It's much easier for the bigger companies who have departments to do nothing else than that. So sometimes I'm wondering whether this was really in the purpose of sustainability, or was it a lobbied action to protect market share for the bigger ones?
oh,
So it's a double-sided sword. It's
yeah.
not that clear.
So let's just say that because the world seems to be going in this way, and Europe is always leading with this sustainable pushes, what changes in the technology have you seen over the years that make power electronics more sustainable?
Yeah, I think one of the key elements in the past few years were the introduction of silicon carbide and gallium nitride technology for the semiconductors. They offer a higher efficiency, therefore less power loss, which is good. But they come with the drawback that the electromagnetic compatibility of these devices are harder to manage, because you tend to have faster switching cycles. Therefore, you create higher frequency noise, which is more difficult to contain in the product. But that's definitely a trend, and that's gradually becoming more and more viable.
So back to the topic of compliance and regulations, what role does Selenius play in helping your customers deal with this? Because this could be a bureaucratic nightmare for some of your entrepreneur clients who just want to launch an amazing product.
Yeah, we have to make them aware of it, and we offer them support in different areas. We have connections to accredited labs, both in Taiwan and China. We have staff that has already filled up the the online databases. For automotive components, there is called MDS system, Material Data Sheet System, which is another pain in the butt to register all your details. We have done that. We know how to do this, and we can either support our customers to doing it or refer them to people that are experts in that field.
What would you say is the level of education of the typical customer about all of this compliance in the beginning?
I would say you're an American, so the Americans tend to be more hands-on and just say like, okay, I just go and then I'll solve the problem later. In Europe, we see more hesitation to take that kind of approach. We see a lot of fear of CEOs of making mistakes, because we don't have such a culture where, you're only a successful businessman if you have run 3 companies into bankruptcy first, then you know what to be aware of. Whereas in Europe, especially in Germany, bankruptcy is considered a big failure of your personality. So people are more afraid of making mistakes there.
Okay.
So when I feel dealing with North American clients, I would say they are often less concerned in the beginning until they hit a problem, and then they're very concerned, because you have a culture of litigation.
Right. Yeah, and so Europe doesn't really have this culture of litigation. It sounds like you help your customers with the compliance in Europe. Is there another level of compliance that has to happen on the Asia side, in Taiwan and Thailand and China?
Most of the compliance regulation when it comes to technical compliance are referring to IEC norms, and they are normally the basis of most regulations outside of the US. US often has their own set of FCC and UL regulations, but the rest of the world tends to make their regulation around the IEC norms. Also, Australia and Canada and Britain and Japan and so normally they go around these IEC norms, and then sometimes they have national differences that you have to adhere by, but the very good labs, I mean, that they are trained and they have staff and they know how to address them. So usually you go around the IEC norms that are applicable to that product.